Why is Norm Eisen a villain in your eyes?
Well, it's all very troubling. Norm Eisen belongs to, he's known as a lawfare activist, someone who launched hundreds of lawsuits against Donald Trump through his vehicle Crew during the first admin, and then spearheaded basically every act of lawfare. He really is the legal hatchet man for the blob, the sort of quarterback, the lawyer of all lawyers when it comes to malfeasance and malicious prosecutions. Assisted the impeachment of Donald Trump in 2019, started a whole podcast about trying Trump and spearheading the legal strategy for arresting Donald Trump, plotting that during his term and then helping execute it while Trump was in exile those 4 years. And so pretty much all lawfare flows through Norm Eisen. And John Roberts, it's actually been disclosed, and I have to credit an account called The Researcher on X, who appears to spend most of his or her day simply watching Norm Eisen videos and posting short clips.
Amazing.
Actually found a confession from Norm Eisen where he was hemming and hawing a little bit, it seemed, about whether or not to disclose. In one of the clips, he was bragging about it. That's the one from that tweet that you just showed, that John Roberts, right. Chief Justice John Roberts, had gone for a full week to stay under Norm Eisen's roof. That account then posted a second clip of Norm Eisen saying that actually John Roberts had gone to visit him twice, and that they are apparently close friends and an ally of Norm Eisen on the courts. They actually had a whole planning session about how to potentially pressure or get into the minds of the chief justices. And Norm Eisen said, actually, John Roberts is good. I know him. He's a peer. We're friends. He's visited me twice. When you see statements from John Roberts, like the unilateral statement that he penned when Trump began truthing and tweeting about the removal of judges who were clearly doing these district court in far left jurisdiction rulings to affect hundreds of millions of people here in the United States. If you remember, Chief Justice John Roberts made the unprecedented decision to, without a case even being before him, writing a public letter condemning Trump for even talking about such topics. Right. This sort of connects to the larger picture of what Norm Eisen really is. I mean, Norm Eisen, I don't consider him a lawyer. He was a U.S. ambassador, the head of the State Department for the Czech Republic, which is sort of the East-West gateway. This is where China initially set up shop to begin its dominance over Europe. There's a lot of strange affairs running from China to Hunter Biden that flow through that exact region. While Norm Eisen was there, one of the things he said he was most proud of was spearheading, I should say, assisting or gently encouraging the prosecutions of the State Department's political enemies. He actually bragged about getting the Czech Republic to effectively arrest enemies of the state, and by that I mean the U.S. State Department. But this is part of a color revolution cadre. That's really the best way to understand Norm Eisen and the role of he just spoke at the Tesla takedowns, the big protests, street protests. And you have to understand, part of this color revolution playbook for how to overthrow a democratically elected government involves lawfare in the courts, and it involves riots or violent adjacent street protests that surround the parliament buildings, shut down roads, right. Cause mass worker things. And you can actually find in the writings from Norm Eisen's contemporaries that these riots and street protests impact the decisions of the judiciary. They gave an example, I believe, from Georgia. Michael McFaul, one of Norm Eisen's close contemporaries and frequent co-panelists in this, described how, I believe it was in Georgia in the early 2000s, they orchestrated a color revolution to challenge an election result. And even though the other side was winning, they got enough street muscle in the streets that McFaul appeared to brag that the judges did not want to rule in favor of the opponent who appeared to be winning because they were afraid of the violence and instability on the ground of the protests. And so they nullified the election result. We see something similar happening in Romania and also in Serbia and Georgia, but they're doing it here. Brazil. Yeah. But the fact is Norm Eisen plays that key role in quarterbacking that, and the fact that he appears to have not just a man on the Supreme Court, but the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is extremely troubling.
Staying at his mansion and discussing rule of law issues for a week. My goodness, I'm sure that the right people are rightly concerned about that, but the problem becomes, what do you do about it? This raises another question. If this is something that we kind of accidentally learned about through vigilant researchers like the researcher online, what other relationships are undisclosed? They're happening right under our noses, but we know that there is this kind of broader relationship between these transatlantic groups, these legal elites, these political operatives, and very big names inside our ruling class. That whole thing needs to start unraveling. But I don't know how we go about doing that. If all of these are kind of hush-hush meetings, private individuals, how do you do that?
Well, I'm going to actually be publishing this in next week, a lengthy analysis of what's publicly available on that. And you'd be surprised how extensive it already is. And then we'll get to the declassifications that I believe need to be made at the higher level. Tulsi Gabbard just today at ODNI announced a new task force for transparency and declassification. And the main phrase that I'd like the audience to take away from today, if they simply want to Google on their own or DuckDuckGo or Brave or Grok on their own, is the phrase rule of law. You may have heard this phrase as a sort of bantying cry from the left and from Democrats when they were trying to arrest Donald Trump by saying, no one's above the law, no one's above the law. Then, of course, if Trump were to ever arrest one of them, it would be, malicious prosecution, and suddenly no one would be above the law in that case. But rule of law, that's not an accident that they use that phrase. That is the phrase that is the banner name for the programs under which all of these judicial networks are built, and the judicial vassal state is made over foreign countries. So, for example, Norm Eisen was a part of something called the Transatlantic Democracy Working Group. And as you noted, him and Chief Justice Roberts were engaging in American and EU rule of law exchanges. And these rule of law exchange programs are vast. They are in pretty much every country, every populated country on planet Earth at this point, because it's part of a standard checklist of how we attain vassal state control, political vassalage control over foreign countries. We seek economic levers, we seek civil society levers, we seek media levers, we seek legal levers. It's a standard checklist. Every U.S. embassy does this. And the ABA, for example, the American Bar Association, which is the credentialing association for having a law degree in this country, is active in over 50 different countries and has gotten millions of dollars of U.S. aid funding. All of these programs involve networking judges and connecting them to vast systems of NGOs, leaders, both domestic and foreign, and building up their networks so that they're more likely to get promoted up into the appellate court and into the Supreme Court. And all of these entanglements now need to be unwound as we're seeing what's happened when this network is fully activated against a democratically elected president.
One light at the end of the tunnel, Mike, is as these hacktivist judges start fighting back against the Trump agenda, they're exposing themselves to just how politically weak they are based on how they got into, they received these appointments from political activists themselves. And so they're starting to expose some of that. People are starting to listen to, subscriptions like yours. They're listening to how people get into these positions, and the education that's available to the American public now about how this system works is unparalleled. And so I think that's the light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to have more of an educated populace so long as they're listening to guys like you.
Well, thank you, Chanel. The nice thing is that judges are barred from hearing cases if there's even the appearance of impropriety. And just as was done with U.S. aid and with impropriety at the intelligence community and at the DHS level, I do believe the same thing can be done in the case of this judicial lawfare and rogue district court issue. And I do believe that sunlight will truly be the best disinfectant here.